Yep, that works.
Podcasting. We're podcasting once again.
Podcasting once again. I feel like every single episode, not recently, because I haven't done this in a while, but the last several episodes, we begin it by being like, wow, I haven't done this in a while. But like this time, really haven't done it in a
whiles
while.
are just becoming increasingly longer periods of time.
Yeah.
Well, how are we, Jack?
Yeah, oh God, I don't know. I'm stressed. That's how I am. But fucking here we are. I'm back. I was going to say, I was in the belly of the beast, the Imperial Core, went back home.
The New World.
The New World,
the
Americas, yeah. But then I don't know, still in it. Just on the other side of the pond, I guess. So.
Yeah. A different overlapping subsystem of the core.
Yeah, exactly. Different operational theaters.
Interacting with a different portion of the environment of imperialism and oppression.
Yeah, I tell you what, though, Metasystem back home, perhaps not doing so well. I don't know how many takes I actually have on like what's happening, because everybody can tell things are just completely falling apart. But it's nuts. More people are talking about it, for sure. More people are like, oh, is America falling apart?
The collapse of the country and the system. And,
this actually seems really bad. Like, we get bad news every single day, and it's not getting better, even though there's a blue guy in the White House. So.
Is it more people that have been talking about it? But I feel like this has been the conversation for years.
It's been the conversation for years, but I feel like there are more libs who are like, let's just get out of the fucking streets. Let's just destroy things, riot. Who cares?
Well, I feel like we have all been like gradually coming round to the reality of an impending apocalypse.
Oh, yeah.
And I think people have just chosen different times. And some of them are mundane and stupid, right? Like, I've been thinking about my own sort of like considerations of impending catastrophe. And perhaps my triggers for that are greater than the ones that I'm about to state as examples. But I've been also putting it on a continuum with those people who were like, Brexit, that was the catastrophe. Or like,
exactly.
Or like, I don't know. Yeah, maybe I'm just like coming to terms with the reality of the whole sort of like dark timeline meme or something.
Yeah.
But,
I don't know. I mean,
but I was about to say though, but like the coming to terms with it that you're recognizing liberals as having is this kind of like realizing that they no longer believe their own bullshit. You know?
Yeah,
like,
for sure. Yeah.
How long can you go on being like, our opinions are in the majority when you poll people, but all of the actual concrete political realities are sliding in totally the opposite direction to the ones that you think are. But I don't know. Maybe it just reveals the hypocrisy to other people.
Yeah, exactly. Themselves. And that's what I'm telling myself.
Yeah.
But I mean,
maybe it's Main Street. Like maybe it's like your everyday progressives and liberals are like losing faith in the liberal thought leaders. Yeah. And that kind of bullshit.
I mean, I was thinking about this today because while I was back home, I was like, oh my God, like people I never would have thought would say things like this are now just like burn the Supreme Court to the ground, go throw bricks at Clarence Thomas. You know what I mean? But like, and I don't know, that was making me feel good because who wouldn't like to see a brick get thrown at Clarence Thomas, allegedly? But I don't know. I was thinking about it a bit more today, and it just seems like this always happens in like quote unquote revolutionary periods, which I'm not saying we're experiencing now by any means, but like in the lead up to revolutionary periods, you always see like the libs or like the liberal equivalent. And I'm, like when I say liberal, I'm being very generous. I mean like everybody, like, you know, like value form people or whatever, right? But like you always see people get radicalized who otherwise wouldn't be, and you always see the rhetoric speed up and everything. So I guess all I'm saying is just like, to the commies and the anarchists and all the cool people out there who are like, wow, look at all these liberals. Like, you know, they're like ready to go. They're ready to, you know, change things and do all this stuff. I think when the rubber meets the road and in any kind of like real revolutionary period, when it comes time to like, okay, we kind of won, let's talk about how we can actually change things. The liberals are always just liberals. You know what I mean? I say as there's a police car going by. But like, I don't know. They'll always show you kind of like what they actually want. It'll get to that point where it's like, okay, let's change the world for the better. And then they'll go, let's institute term limits in the Supreme Court. And they dust their hands. They go, everything's fine. And then they, you know, shoot the people in Bavaria or whatever. But like, I don't know. All I'm saying is like, maybe I'm creating relatively like absurd in-groups and out-groups. But like, there are the people who want to like replace the value form with something based perhaps on liberty and equality. There's kind of everybody else. And even though like these groups are fluid and they move in different circumstances, you know, when you're out on the streets protesting and throwing bricks or whatever, like you'll probably be beside some liberals. At the end of the day, like, don't let them fool you.
Yeah, I think probably what it is that no change in the external world is suddenly going to switch the flip the commie switch in the heads of all of these like quote unquote liberals and progressives. It probably makes the case for our organizations and institutions, or particularly radical organizations and institutions in America, having a very consistent line on critiquing the Constitution, calling for a new Constitution, and saying what that should have in it. And if all of these liberals, however close they are to actually being thought leaders in the liberal and progressive community, if they're all willing to put forward the idea that you need some kind of like reforms to the Constitution, minor tweaks, as you say, term limits or whatever, heaven forbid, like capping campaign contributions or something.
Oh my God.
They're at least proposing something which it might lead people to think, hey, this is a possibility, and then you're ready to swoop in with your like, well, actually, let's abolish the Senate and get rid of the judiciary and have whatever, and like, one person, one vote, and like,
imagine that, liberals. Imagine that. Imagine like someone's vote counting for something.
Abolish the presidency.
Abolish the executive branch. Abolish the Senate. Abolish the whatever. Yeah, I don't know. It felt every time I go back home, it's always like, I don't know. It's a weird feeling because it's always like home and it's always awesome and it's always great, but it's also like that thing that always used to be a spirit Halloween that's just like always an empty warehouse for the rest of the year. Now it's like a church with like a neon open sign out front. You know what I mean? It's like things are not feeling so good. But yeah, I don't know. It's weird. It's very weird. Also, just like I've been really trying to come to terms with like what a failure of American, like the ability of the American political animal to like project its power around the globe would look like. Not saying that's something that's going to happen anytime soon, although like, who knows? Nobody has any idea what could happen. It could be good. It could let people who have like wanted to have like self-determination and like, you know, we're going to be talking about Stafford beer here. Like, you know, if there's someone like Allende, like something like that could maybe happen a little bit easier. But also it could just be an apocalypse. Who knows? So, you know, who knows? What are you going to do?
I mean, it depends who else is going to step in and fulfill the imperial function, I guess, or what kind of regional hegemons are going to influence. I don't know. Who knows?
Or if it's even possible. I mean, like
the CIA will go rogue. And
Well, that's something I've been thinking about is like legitimately how much power do you actually need to do something like what the CIA does? Like realistically, the CIA isn't able to like, or wasn't able to do all of the like crazy things that it did, right? Because like there's some ultimate American like hegemon. I think realistically it was able to do those things because it had resources that imperial hegemon gives you, but also just because like there was an agreement amongst the bourgeoisie, the big bourgeoisie, that they were like, this is what we want done. Presumably that can happen whether or not there's some big ass American hegemon or not, but suffice it to say, who knows? This is all way too complex to, I think, make predictions. So.
This is not a podcast that engages itself in System 4 thinking.
Yeah, exactly.
We are not predictors of the future.
We're barely System 1.
I long ago gave up having takes. Like, and my recommendations are always terrible. Yeah. So just
aggressive beans, everybody.
Yeah. Yeah, I recently acquired an allotment.
Yes, so, Dan, yes. Very exciting.
Jack and I have now, well, not quite double because I already had some growing capacity, but Jack and I have now increased our capacity to grow beans and other food
Very absurdly, for the listener, they gave Dan the allotment literally next to me. And that's like a 1 in 120 chance for them to do that. And they just did. So, hey, cool. Nice. So we got that going for us, folks. The commune is being built.
We're taking over.
We're almost there. That would be hilarious if that's like the base of revolution. It's just like, we just doubled our allotment size. Go from there. What are you gonna do?
It's base building. Right?
Base building. Yeah, exactly. Literally just acquiring land. We do know the person over the other side of me, which is also very funny.
Although we are renting land.
Yeah, we'll get there. No, we will be renting our land. Potatoes have been dug up. That always feels like a bit of a shift. They were first early, so they're kind of out a bit earlier. But we're back. We haven't podcasted in a while. Things are changing. Things are awesome. Things are great. So I think perhaps what we're going to try and do here is look to the future. I know you said that we are barely a System 4 over here, but we're going to engage in a little intelligence monitoring of the environment here. And we read the one Stafford beer book we could get our hands on, because they're basically all really expensive. And this was the one book our local library had 2 copies of. So, Dan, we read Stafford Beer's Diagnosing the System for Organizations. Bit of a mouthful. It's really interesting, very useful. Bit difficult to kind of get through at certain points because it's very technical, but it's also written for like a schmuck to understand. So it was pretty good. We'll get into kind of some thoughts here in a second that I had, but overall, what did you think, and what did you kind of pull as meaningful nuggets?
Yeah, I think it needs a second reading to gain everything that you might from it. Not because, as you say, it's particularly obtuse in the way that it's written, but I think because it progresses at quite a pace.
Yeah, definitely.
And you need to keep pace with it. And the only way to do that really is to keep redoubling your efforts to understand what it is that he's trying to say. Yes, it's. I don't actually know how long his other books are, so I was about to say it's mercifully short, but who knows, actually. I imagine they're tomes.
Yeah.
Seems to have a curious background in that it seems to be the result of some kind of collaboration he made with some students in their efforts to conceptualize and apply his viable system model to various institutions, organizations. And so it's kind of a guide to teach you to apply these ideas to any given institution that you are familiar with. Including like giving you little exercises to do, which I think neither of us did.
No,
to any great
there are
degree.
way too many.
Yeah.
He is like, you need to be doing these. He says that like throughout.
I mean,
the
book. This is like a 150-page book that could be the basis of like a 6-month course.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I mean, we've interacted with Stafford Beer a few times, right? We produced a little video for YouTube, and also we read Designing Freedom. And so we've sort of like touched on some of these ideas, the viable system model, but there were definitely things that I thought I understood about that sort of like 5-system tiered structure for a viable system, which I didn't fully comprehend, and this is very definitely filled in a lot of gaps. So hopefully we can demonstrate some of our new learning.
Yeah, so let's hope so.
Pass it on, I suppose.
It on.
And also perhaps apply it to certain situations that might be applicable to a left. Because this book, I mean, who do you think it's written for?
I mean, it's pretty bourgeois.
Yeah.
It's written for managers, I think. I think it is just like a handbook for managers, and specifically managers of capitalist firms. And I mean, this book was written later in his career, so I was almost expecting the opposite. But I think that this is very much management cybernetics. But having said that, the system that he's describing, the viable system, he is saying you can apply this to anything.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, as is evident in most of his writing, there is definitely this contradiction, isn't there, between his background and his work, and then also his his real world experience of politics and some of his more, I don't mean this in a pejorative sense, but like a utopian thinking, I suppose, or like idealism. But that idealism comes from maybe a slightly more bourgeois place, I suppose.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's a guy who gets paid to like help make capitalist firms exploit better, right?
Yeah. So none of his examples are trade unions or political parties or like food co-ops or anything like that, gun clubs or something.
Yeah, they very well could be though, I think.
Yeah, I mean, this is what we might like to try and speculate on. Is like it is a model whereby he uses examples of like government bureaucracies or corporations or what have you, but it's an abstract model we might be able to apply to all sorts of things, and some of the principles that it suggests are highly applicable to any amount of thinking if you're trying to organize anybody to do anything. Yeah, even just yourself, maybe.
Yeah, exactly. Well, you are the smallest recursion there is. I think you said that in the last reading we did of him. But, I mean, this kind of, when we read People's Republic of Walmart like 50 years ago, and the kind of one of the lessons you get from that book is to not just be such a juvenile leftist and go, we need to fucking burn Amazon down, dude. It's like, no, like learn from these corporations, learn from what they do. Because they've definitely learned from us, right? They've learned from the calculation debate. So I got a similar vibe from this book. I mean, yes, he is describing describing corporations and he is describing all of this stuff, but it's also like perhaps one of the reasons that's slightly alienating to left organizers or whatever is because nobody takes it seriously as they should. Nobody treats it like a job. Well, that's not true. People treat it like a job, but organizations as a whole kind of generally don't. And what I mean by that is like nobody's serious about like, I suppose like instituting the kind of system that this book talks about, because A, it's a lot of work, but B, it also seems a little bourgeois. But I think we'll find that it like isn't. And there's a reason that Beer was kind of building on the thought that we kind of came across in that book by Matron and Varela, where they were like kind of a bit hippy-dippy, being like, dude, you can apply like these ideas to like a germ and to like a corporation. It's like Beer kind of came along and like made that a little bit more adult and was like, we actually kind of can. And here's how. And then once you do that, you realize that like similar rules apply to everything. And if you kind of black box certain things, you're able to come to some pretty astounding conclusions. And he definitely does. So,
and he does also. You say it's funny. You say like no or few left-wing organizations are liable to be willing to learn from sort of bourgeois management theorists, and it's almost the opposite is the case in this book as well, in that like his prescriptions are not likely to be well accepted by bourgeois managers.
Yeah, oh, for sure, yeah.
Because this is directed at managers, I think, at various levels of recursion inside institutions or countries or what have you. And it's basically telling them you don't have as much power and influence as you think you do.
Yeah, exactly.
And be very careful or be very mindful of the interventions you try and make. But anyway.
Yeah. No, it's good. I mean, he starts off by saying that this kind of, well, I'm gonna read a couple sentences because I think that this pretty clearly mirrors some thoughts that we've had in the past. So he says, hitherto the approach of organizational structure has only been one tool, the family tree organization chart. And that's just like worker, supervisor, manager, upper management, etc. Typically, this chart has been frozen out of history. It's geological genealogy. Things have got like this because events, inventions, markets, opportunities, entrepreneurs, capitalists, workers, economic environments, glory and misery, all intervening, have led to this, and not to something else. The organizational structure has been rationalized after the event, and there it sits, offering the manager its own explanation for how things actually work. I mean, I think that like kind of mirrors the socialist project pretty clearly, right? It's like, sure, we read all of these, books on history in an attempt to understand how modes of production got to the way they are, and we kind of come to this conclusion that like things are the way they are because a lot of it's out of our control. And we've come across this idea that you bring up quite a bit, Dan, about like, trying to maintain the status quo and that actually leading to quite a big qualitative change when we talk about changes in modes of production, kind of in the abstract. But what Beer is trying to do here is trying to stop that and say, well, what about if we thought about it rationally and like, but not the kind of rationality that's like, here's what I want and I'm just going to make it happen. A kind of rationality that's like, here's the way things actually work. Here's what I'm left with. It's, the history, people don't make their own history, right, whatever. But it's like, I'm going to try and make something better. That's kind of what we're trying to do with the socialist project, right? It's like, here are all these modes of productions that we've been left with. Here's the one we have now. How can we rationally, with what we have, like, make something better consciously? And yeah, that's like the first page of the book, and that stuck out to me because it's like, is it possible to like institute things? Like we talk about, managed and conscious transition to socialism. Is that possible? We'll see. But I think this book gives me hope because he's basically saying that when it comes to organizational structure, it is. And here's how.
Yeah, I wonder whether it's true that he's taking the same kind of like scientific approach to management that sort of like scientific Marxists, historical materialists, what have you, might want to take to analysing social structures and then therefore intervening in social structures kind of thing. Because his is definitely a science of management, right? What's cybernetics, a science of effective organisation?
Exactly.
Is that his line?
Something like that, yeah.
And it's very much predicated on what he takes to be scientific laws. I mean, what really stood out to me actually was how much the law of requisite variety like hangs over all of this.
Sure,
like
yeah.
At any point of recursion in the model or any point of recursion in a system, at any stage of communication or interaction between any of the various systems of the viable system model, the fundamental question is like, how much variety does each side of this interaction have, and how much variety is lost or gained in various interactions, and how much can we manipulate variety by either increasing it or reducing it where necessary, kind of thing. And that, I mean, that question of requisite variety leads to his most radical conclusion, right? And the one which leads him to think purely in terms of decentralization, because he's saying that like any higher level, basically management can never have the variety necessary to match the variety of the operations, what he calls the operations section of his model. At the same time, operations can never have enough variety to match the variety in the wider environment, right? So it's all about recognizing how little you control you have over the levels of recursion below you, and it gives him this. It leads to all of the radical implications of it, which are he's basically checking the imaginary power of the managers think they have to control their system, their organization, kind of thing.
Yeah.
And trying to get away from that and trying to give a model for how an organization actually functions, because systems do function.
Yeah.
Or the ones that what he's trying to do is promote a way to have a viable system, which basically just means like one that's able to survive and exist in any given, perpetuate itself in whatever environment it exists in, kind of thing. And so it's possible to do, but it requires all of these different interactions, all of these different attenuations of variety, I suppose. I don't know whether that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it does, because it's like in Designing Freedom, we came across his example of managers in a store. If they literally wanted to have requisite variety to manage everybody in a store, there would have to be one manager for every worker, and they'd have to follow the worker around. And at that point, they just stop being managers, right? So he's saying that like that is impossible for management to have enough variety in a literal sense without any kind of attenuation or amplification to manage operations, no matter what the system is. You can think about this with the brain too. Like the brain, okay, I'll leave the brain because I think we're going to have to talk about the brain a little bit more when we talk about meta systems and stuff, because it's a bit more nuanced. But like, yeah.
There is an example he uses in this that he may have been in Designing Freedom as well, where he's talking about law enforcement, right?
Yeah.
And basically the only way to attenuate the variety that is represented by a citizenry and its possibility for it to either be the victim of or the perpetrator of crime, the only way to attenuate that variety would be to have 50% of your population policing the other 50% kind of thing, which he obviously says is absurd, right? And then he talks about like amplifying the variety of the police by giving them faster cars or guns or whatever.
Or surveillance.
I wonder whether... but then also I think that may be like variety attenuation. You're sort of surveilling the citizenry, or like checkpoints or internal passports kind of thing would be a way of attenuating the variety that the citizenry is in the position to manifest and therefore threaten the control of the police, kind of thing.
Yeah, I suppose it would be amplification to record everything everybody says, but then attenuation to have some sort of technological way to filter out all the bullshit and just go, this guy mentioned a bomb, he's about to get on a plane, right? Regardless, I think you're absolutely right to talk about his theory of autonomy, because I'm going to read another bit where he talks about where a theory of autonomy actually comes from. He says, the beginnings of a theory of autonomy, of decentralization, lie in this simple fact, rather than in political theory. It's a nettle to grasp because senior management assumes and likes to exercise the power to poke around in the intimate managerial details of its subsidiaries in System 1. But think, the prerogative to intervene indiscriminately does not have requisite variety, and it cannot competently be done. I mean, I think that's a pretty... what's the word? Not ludicrous, but the opposite of ludicrous. Profound stat, yeah. That's a pretty profound thing to say, because, like, we like to think that it's like, no, actually, the political theory, it's this, this, and this. But it reminds you a lot of when Marx would get frustrated with like moralistic appeals to socialism, which perhaps was a bit reactionary, but also like he wanted to say, no, it just makes more sense. Like we're losing all of this energy in a capitalist system. There's so much waste. There's overproduction. There's underproduction. What we're trying to do is just link the use value that you make when you work with the use values that people consume when they consume, and there's this fucking waste that you have with exchange value, right? So basically he's saying that you don't need, Stafford Beer is saying rather, that you don't need some big fancy political theory to figure out that autonomy is good. You just literally need to look at the way systems operate, because I think that like systems and corporations that try to micromanage everything very quickly realize A, that they can't do it, and B, if they try to, they mess everything up. Like, I mean, I think if anyone's ever worked in a retail job or like a job period, like when your boss comes poking around, it just slows everything down. And so it's so much better for your boss to just go, tell me what I need to know. I'll do audits at a certain point to just make sure everything's okay. But at a certain point, who knows how to best to operate its operations, right? And he obviously isn't going to go full anarchist and just say, whatever, no bosses, man, because there does need to be somebody steering the ship, and we'll see what that means. But yeah, it's pretty profound, I think. It rocks. It's very cool.
And it's funny, I'm thinking now that kind of, we've all experienced it, or most of us have, that kind of like management style, which is kind of panopticon-esque,
Yeah.
where it's kind of like your manager can't be there surveilling all of you all of the time, like the police can't be there policing everybody all the time. But that kind of intervention, which is sort of just arbitrary application of force or discipline or whatever, just to remind you that they're ever present, is meant to be a kind of like attenuation of the variety of the workforce, because the workforce can be doing any amount of slacking off or suffering any amount of like physical illness or just like not being into being at work that day kind of thing.
Exactly,
you know,
yeah.
like, and there's so much variety, there's so much stuff going on in terms of your workforce's interaction with the wider world and how they're experiencing it, how they're experiencing being at work. And there's so many different variables in terms of what you're encountering at work that like managers can't possibly be fixing all of those problems all the time. But they can just be reminding you that it's your responsibility to just work harder in the face of these adversities, you know,
Yeah.
or just telling you how much they expect you to achieve.
Yeah, exactly. And there's one of the really, I think, most interesting things about the viable system model is the way that it gets around the nuance of management, because it'd be very easy to just have the three-tiered little thing where it's environment, operations, management, or whatever. But like the system 2, which, as we remember from the video, Dan, that you and I made that is on YouTube that people can go watch now, system 2 is like it's kind of like a little backbone thing. In this, it's really described as like an oscillation, whatever, device that basically operates in between management and operations and kind of like helps put into place what management says. So that's a really interesting idea, because it kind of like decouples management from being this like nagging, like do this, do that, do that. Like, fuck, goddamn it, management's telling me what to do, with like this very clear system that's designed to just like stop things from wiggling around too much. And what does that mean? If you're in a capitalist firm, it would mean something like, oh, we got blight on our potatoes this year. How are we going to deal with that? Oh God, we're all going to lose our jobs because now we made too many potatoes and we're not going to be blah, 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 blah. There would be some sort of dictum that would come down from management, and then system 2 would be like, how can we best implement this? Let's figure out ways. Production control is one of the things that he talks about in this. And one of the things that I think is fairly progressive in this is he talks about how system 2, and generally what management does as a whole, needs to be very transparent. You need to see what it's doing. Like he says that in a capitalist firm, production control is scary and workers hate it because they have no idea what's going on. And they have no access to any of the numbers. They don't know why they're being told, stop producing potatoes or whatever. And so it freaks everybody out. But as long as you have this thing that is kind of like, it decouples, but it also like really intermeshes at the same time management and operations into this really transparent thing that is just there to like stop things from oscillating too much, you appreciate it if you're one of the people down in operations, because you go, oh, they're actually helping. Because you don't necessarily realize the connection between your firm and everybody else, or your firm and even like consumers. But if you had this one thing whose job it is to just do that and let you know what's going on and allow you to have an open thing of communication between different operational firms or whatever, that's a really progressive idea, I think. And one that I think we'll see when we go to talk a bit about how maybe we could put some of these ideas into like left projects. Would really be useful, I think.
Yeah, I think this distinction between variety and oscillation is quite important, because he does draw it out as a distinction. I think his differentiation between the two hinges on variety being this thing that's almost external, or it comes from some other institution that you're interacting with, or your interaction with the environment kind of thing. Whereas oscillation is something that's internal to the activity of any particular system one in this model, I suppose. So they can actually be perfectly well attenuating and amplifying variety in all the directions necessary in the interactions with the environment, in the interactions between the operations center of a system one and the management center of a system one. But if there isn't any communication between all the different sections, imagine like it's some kind of like food production company where some people grow potatoes and some people grow broad beans, and they're all kind of like, okay, we're going to advertise our thing, and we're going to do these kind of, we're going to try and limit production of this, or we're going to exploit cheap access to certain resources in the environment, blah 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 blah. If they're all just sort of selfishly interacting with the environment without consideration of how their interactions with the environment are actually going to interact or affect other system one's interaction with that same environment, they're all going to start fucking each other's activities up without even realizing it, kind of thing. Kind of reminds me of actually when you talked about People's Republic of Walmart, and there's that example of like Sears, right? They try and organize Sears where everything is internal markets, right? There's no communication, there's no coherence. Everybody's just like battling with one another. And like the example, go back to that episode and go back to that book. The examples of what happens are ludicrous, right? Like there's just no cohesion, no coordination at all. And as you say, that kind of like what he calls System 2 is designed to like, okay, how do we dampen this oscillation kind of thing? But in a way which is not dictatorial. And I think he gives some really quite interesting examples of what System 2's interaction to system might be, kind of thing.
Yeah, that was all really useful. I think that's where kind of like, that was a part of the book where it's kind of like school book-esque kind of demeanor really helped it, because it was like, here's what it would be in a firm. Here's what it would be in a health service. Here's what it would be in a family. And you're like, oh my God, the System 2 of the family, it's ideology. It's just horrifying. But yeah, so I think we should actually talk about management then. Management is defined in a really interesting way, and it's all balanced in a way that kind of like almost like manages the variety of that you could the variety of like authoritarianism, right? And it's a way to make it so that management isn't just this thing that like dictates and tells you what to do, and is designed so that it can't get too big of a head, right? And so it's split up, the meta systems, if everybody remembers from our video, it's split up into 3, 4, and 5, systems 3, 4, and 5. And respectively, 3, 4, and 5, I think an easy way to remember that is System 3 is control, System 4 is kind of like intelligence, and System 5 is like literally just like policy and ethos. I mean, there's a bit more to it, but System 3 is, I think if like an alien were to come down, and if everything was organized along viable system model lines, they might be like, they would either say all of the power is held in System 1 because that's operations, or they would say that I think that all of the power is held in System 3 because System 3 is literally just like directly above operations, and it manages the here and now, is what he says. The inside and the here and now. It manages the oscillations that come up. Whenever it gets something from higher management that says, hey, there's going to be an El Nino year this year, we got to manage our food production in this specific way, it makes resource allocations and suggestions / dictates to operations to say, here's what we need done. So it manages all of that. And it also kind of does all these little audits, and it makes sure things are running properly. But then 4 is like gathers intelligence, which I thought was interesting. It's like it literally just kind of gathers intelligence from the emergent market. He makes this distinction that System 1, the operations, monitor their own environments. So if we think of this whole system as a capitalist firm, say a corporation, actually, then System 1 would be like the various shop fronts, maybe, right? And they're monitoring their own environments. It's all recursive, so they have management in their own operational systems, and they go, oh, in say like this borough of London, people seem to like this. So, we'll put that up at like impulse buy items that people buy here. We'll put that up at the shop at the front. But System 4, they do the emergent market. And like the different markets and the different environments that operations keep an eye on, when you put them all together, the reason I say they're emergent is because I think that they're greater than the sum of their parts. And so you need something that is literally just there to see it in its totality and go, okay, here are some trends that are coming up that we need to figure out. Here are some things that we might be okay with. And then they give all that information, the intelligence, to System 3, and they go, do this, make it happen. And then there's System 5, which is literally, he brings up this word over and over, it's just ethos. It's like, what is it that we want here? And if there are some decisions that need to be made, System 5 makes it. I mean, when Stafford was in Chile, he said this was just Allende, right? So it's really interesting. I think that like balancing out management like that really leads to a way where it's perhaps not super hierarchical. And I think you brought up a really good point before this about we need to actually figure out how we could make these things like democratic, and we'll get to that. But all in all, it would be much better, I think, to be a schmuck working in operations with this as management than something else, because there are all sorts of things and checks and balances and whatever. So it's really fascinating.
Yeah.
Management, huh?
Yeah. I agree with all of that. I think I took a different sort of like schema for understanding those, but I think they match quite well. I was thinking of like System 3 talks about it being like the sort of here and now, the day-to-day planning, how am I going to oversee all of these different operations in a coordinated way kind of thing. And then the kind of System 4 is the more sort of future planning kind of thing. And as you say, it's like interacting with the environment as a whole. So like if you have all of these like supermarket elements of a supermarket chain, and they all have their little, okay, I'm this town, I'm this borough, as you say, kind of thing. And then the System 4 is like, okay, all of the United Kingdom as a whole. And then also it's the kind of like included in the environment includes like the future as a part of the environment kind of thing.
Nuts.
And then he talks about there being these different levels of System 4, right? There's the kind of like, there's R&D, or there's like other types of future planning, and there's a degree to which their various interactions with the environment overlap, and that would be quite positive because they're all sort of working toward a similar end. And then you could have this sort of like poor functioning of System 4 where actually there's not any overlap between all of these different future planning sections of your business or your organization kind of thing. And then a piece of terminology that he's maybe we've talked about it in the past is this idea of like homeostasis, right? The sort of like systems or functions which stabilize the internal environment in an organization kind of thing. And I think he thinks that there is possibility for a lot of like sort of breakdown of the relationship between System 4 and System 3 kind of thing.
Sure, yeah.
And ideally there would be some kind of homeostasis between the two where the two balance each other out. And what I took away was this idea that one of the aspects of System 5 is that it's there to monitor and maintain this sort of like homeostasis between 3 and 4. And as you say, it's sort of done with sort of ethos or like, which, because in the past we've kind of talked about it being a system which sort of like maintains the sort of like coherency of the sort of organism, I suppose, kind of thing. But I'm not sure which of those systems in this instance it would be that would fulfill that function kind of thing. Maybe it's System 5 in the sense that it has this kind of like overarching, okay, a picture of the whole organization kind of thing and where it's doing now and what it's doing in the future kind of thing. And then there's also that finally that idea of like, we've come across it before and he talks about it in this book of the sort of algedonic signal, the pain signal, which sort of demands an immediate response kind of thing. And that kind of like circumnavigates everything and goes all the way to System 5 because that's the level which is like, okay, we can see everything and we can like make some kind of immediate intervention kind of thing.
Interestingly, I think it also goes both ways, and it also isn't just operations going to System 5. I think you could probably set it up so that operations going to System 3, which would I guess just be System 2, but one thing of operations going to System 4, fucking System 5 going just to one, operational center. That's really interesting. And maybe I think that like the reason a lot of left projects have kind of failed is maybe because they didn't have a System 5 that was strong enough. If your System 5 is just surviving under capitalism as an activist group or whatever, you're not getting rid of capitalism, right? You're going to be the DSA or whatever. Yeah, we'll get to that. I think we'll get to that because I think the McNair actually helps with that. But this is all really, really insane. And I think one thing that this all makes me think of too is like this. I don't think I really understood the recursive structure until we read this, because like he really makes it clear. There's one section of the book where he says a lot of people mess up the VSM because they don't know what they can apply it to. And they think that they can just apply it to, if it's a capitalist firm, everything's a viable system. Advertising department's a viable system. The IT department's a viable system. And this took me a little bit to understand, but he's basically saying if you can hive it off or whatever is the phrase that he says, that's a viable system. So if it's a capitalist corporation, a viable system is the entity as a whole, and then it's also, the viable systems are really only like shop fronts and things like that. They're not each department, because you can't just let the advertising guys go do whatever without being a part of the system, because they're actually part of that system. A shop front can be a shop front, and yet can be recursive, and you can go down to like the people in the warehouse, the people here or whatever. But you have to be selective with what you apply this to. And if you're doing some kind of left organizing project, you have to do the same thing. You can't just say everything's a viable system. You have to really be specific with what is and what isn't. And I don't think I got that until reading this book. And I think maybe in the video we make, it's a little bit unclear as to what recursive actually is.
We left that off, didn't we? And then we had to be told, really, you want to include something about recursion because it's quite important. So
and then also
it on at the end. So it was good for us both to have that sort of reminder of he talks about that very early on, of the significance of recursion. And it's interesting. It's one of the things that makes him privilege system 1 above other elements of this system. It's like system 1 is actually a recursion. So basically, like he has this diagram of the viable system model, right? And it has all of these systems 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And you could have a whole series of different system 1s which all fall under a sort of like a vertical hierarchy, which then includes the management sections of 3, 4, and 5. But any system 1 also includes all of these system 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 elements kind of thing. Like just some lower level of recursion kind of thing. So whether it's like you have this sort of like a plant which produces a certain thing, it produces pens, say, and there's like all of these different machines at this plant that produce different elements of this machine. So then all of those machines and all of the teams that work on all of those machines could be lower levels of recursion system 1s all to themselves kind of thing. And then of course you've got all the people who are system 1s to themselves at another lower level of recursion kind of thing. But then all of your sort of that plant then has like a management structure that also goes up to like a system 5 and a system 4 and what have you kind of thing. So,
yeah, it's really interesting. And he says at the beginning, doesn't he? He's like, whenever you're thinking about your system, you need to be thinking in 3s. You need to be thinking at a recursion level lower than it and a recursion level bigger than it. So if it's, say, again, a corporation, recursion lower than it, probably some kind of shop front or online business or something like that. Recursion bigger than it, say you're like Yukonuba and you make dog food, it's the entire dog food industry, right? And then you can keep going until it's like markets, and then it's just like capitalism.
And it's Amazon.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. Everything. Which I thought was really interesting.
Yeah.
You're always thinking in 3s like that. I was like, oh yeah, because you need to be thinking of, if you do that, then you're always thinking about how you're organizing things below you and where you fit in your environment too. It's really interesting.
And then you brought it up before a bit, there's this question of like, okay, what is and what isn't a viable system inside some greater structure, right? And his definition for viability is, can it exist on its own, separate from that institution, in a given environment, say? And he, obviously uses the example of like, human beings are viable systems, but like, if there were no oxygen in the room, you wouldn't be a viable system because you wouldn't be existing in an environment. That, and so it's another interesting thing of like, everything is in an environment. And everything is in that chain of like, there is a lower level of recursion and there is a higher level of recursion. And so there is no obviously there's one way of looking at it where you're looking at individual entities, individual organizations, individual systems, but at the same time, everything is included in some kind of network and of connectivity and of significance and reciprocity and all sorts of things.
For sure. And I think that 2 things on that. I think that like, the way he privileges the environment as like just as much of a part of a system as everything else, as you're saying, is like hugely important. And I think that's something that perhaps a lot of like organizations have not done. the environment within which they operate. And also just like, well, I don't know. I suppose we haven't really talked too much about the kind of like central dictum of this book, which is the purpose of a system is what it does. I suppose that like ties a bit more into like management and about like ethos and about things like that. But it's also about like, if you think of a higher recursion level of yourself and you've never thought about that before, say if you're a capitalist firm, like that lets you think about, well, what is it that I'm actually doing? What is the next higher recursion up from me? Is it the industry that I want to be in, or am I a part of something else? Is it that like I make dog food and I have my indie little business and I sell everything on Amazon? I'm part of like the broader economy, or is it like, oh, I'm actually like just at the whims of Amazon, aren't I? It's, yeah, I don't know. It's very interesting. The purpose of a system is what it does. I mean, that's something that like all left organizers need to be hammered into their skull. Like,
the purpose of your Trotskyist sect is to sell
newspapers
and provide full-time employees of the sector income. I think.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So I guess before we go on to like apply this to like some left organizations, there was a question that I kind of had, which we were discussing a little bit before we started recording, which is like, okay, this is a kind of like bourgeois management theory book, and replete through this is this sort of like sense that although autonomy and independence is not only like virtuous, but it's also necessary given the implications of the law of requisite variety. There's always this discussion of a vertical command structure. There's always a place for management and management decisions to be made. And so I was thinking about ways in which you could apply this model to a democratically organized workplace, say, kind of thing. How much is there a distinction? What's the because the model has like operations, which is like what you could imagine to be like all your schmucks on the shop floor kind of thing, working their machines, and there's a blue collar, salt of the earth working class, and then you've got your sort of like management, your sort of like white collar people who've been to business school, and but other than saying like, okay, it is necessary to have some kind of management function be fulfilled in some way, it actually leaves open a lot of space for that management function to be fulfilled in whatever way you want. Like you could just get everybody who's your blue collar shop floor worker, one day out of 5. Okay, we all get together and we decide upon what we're going to make the decisions that would otherwise be decided by some separate management structure, but do that together, kind of thing. Or how much could you have all of those people on all of those shop floors elect people to do the System 3 function, you know? Or how often could they all get together and have an annual general meeting and fulfill the functions of System 5, you know? Or like how often could certain people with certain expertise at System 1 get together and have a brainstorming session on future planning and fulfill some System 4 functions? And it sort of seems to me that you could definitely use these principles to inform a democratically organized workplace and economy, and it doesn't necessarily have to be strictly hierarchical, even though this book is sort of couched in those terms because it kind of had to be.
Yeah. Well, I think absolutely. I think because there's this recursivity in the structure, everyone should necessarily know and indeed take part in at least some kind of management function. I mean, I think like just having a structure that everyone understands that is recursive and that applies to every level of everything would do huge things for like the management operations divide, because at a certain point there kind of almost isn't one. I mean, I will say we came across in Cybernetic Revolutionaries that people in operational like System 1 units did start to chafe a little bit at like the interveners or whatever they were called. And these were kind of guys that were like maybe anti-oscillatory, maybe some kind of like System 3 star or whatever he calls it, like auditors, but the guys that kind of came around and were like, don't do that, do this. And that kind of, Eden Medina kind of made it seem like almost like a class started to form there of these guys that like went around with their clipboards and their nice cars and told people not to do it. But I think what you're saying is that this necessarily, he can say all he wants that like you don't need a political theory to understand autonomy, but you do a bit. You definitely do, and you need to understand that like power dynamics would play a huge role in the social structure of a society. And I think what you're saying about like if these things are democratic and if people are all immediately recallable, no matter what system they're in, no matter who they are, That would also be big. That combined with being able to like understand management structures, that just completely demystifies everything. It's like, oh, he's the system 4 of where he works. I'm the system 4 of where I work. But someone else is like, wait, you're the system 1. What are you talking about? So, yeah.
Yeah, sounds like craziness can ensue.
Yeah, it does. Wait a minute. Maybe this doesn't make sense.
Some kind of break is happening. But yeah, but what is implied by, I think, what you just said is that you can't just take this book, apply it to present day capitalism, and be like, okay, if everything was a viable system, we'd have socialism,
yeah.
kind of thing. Like the contradictions of that are implicit in the case of Chile and in Allende's Chile, right? Like they're trying to take a capitalist economy, they're sort of trying to implement some of these things, but it's still kind of like some kind of hybrid, slightly socialist, slightly capitalist. Well, it's like, I don't know. I don't want to get into like debates about state capitalism and all sorts of stuff. Yeah. But suffice to say, like, they had to make it work. And they had to make it work in terms of people's understanding and people's like self-conception. I mean, maybe it's a system 2 error, right? In that instance, like there isn't this sort of like overarching ideology that dictates people's relationship to the system. And so all of those interveners were still stuck in a kind of slightly bourgeois mindset, as everybody was, perhaps. Everybody still wants to become white collar as opposed to blue collar. Yeah. Everybody wants to improve their lives and get the flashy cars and have the power over people and that kind of thing. So you just hadn't sufficiently gone through some kind of transformation that would be necessary to actually get us to a different mode of production. And there are political questions that hang all over. Well, it's a different. In some ways, it's just a totally different topic. But this is like a sub-science of the broader science of socialism.
Yeah, no, for sure. Definitely. And I don't know. It'd be nice to find, like, I don't know, there aren't necessarily, like, cybernetics departments anywhere, I don't think. Like, presumably there are. In the back of this book, it's written in, like, the 80s, they list all these people that are, like, doing great work with the viable system, but perhaps those people don't exist anymore. Maybe they do. But, okay, maybe then we kind of get into it a bit about, like, talking about, because I think we already have started to do this, about, like, what lessons can we take from this and apply to, like, actual organizing. Well, I think that the first thing is to just not be allergic to, like, control, because, like, this is literally, if you were to read this book and go, too bourgeois, I don't like the idea of trying to control, I just want anarchy, brother. That's cool, I respect that, but also, like, this is the science of how you have not only effective control, but also, like, control from inside of the system itself that literally balances itself out. So, I mean, I was thinking about this in terms of 3 different spheres. I was thinking about it and how you could apply it to a capitalist firm, which we've talked quite a bit about, how it could necessarily be applied to some kind of like bourgeois democratic party, and then how it could be applied to anything from like a party based on the SPD to like something brand new. And I think that something brand new, like I brought up McNair earlier, the one thing that's really stuck with me from reading his book was about organizing the entire community and about how if you want to have, let's just call it a political party or a party of some kind of working class party, it can't just be concerned with politics, and it can't just go after like workers, right? Like, or it needs to go after everyone who's relying on the wage fund. And McNair explains that as like, like people on unemployment, people on the dole, people who are like spouses of people who work. And so I think that that's very different if we compare that with the bourgeois party, which, like, the bourgeois party, the only people they're interested in, the, like, operations and management connection to the environment are voters, right? That's really all they care about. But I think that if we look at the connections that the system itself has to the environment and what you'd want to see in a new, like, working class style party, it would be much more generalized and also much more, like, you need to have very specific operational centers. Your system ones would need to be very specific. They'd need to, like, you need to have your activists and your things like that, but you'd also need like trade unions if you're talking about the SPD. I mean, like that's not necessarily something that like the Democrats really thought about in a very long time is, hey, imagine working with trade unions. But you'd also need people who like, I don't know, like to be very specific, like soup kitchens for homeless people or like, I don't know, all sorts of different kind of operational centers. Because if you really take like McNair's dictum seriously about like, no, let's actually like try and do the right thing and the thing that will work for all of us, which is organizing everybody relying on the wage fund. Your operational theaters, your system ones are going to be different. And I think there's going to need to be some sort of way of managing that in your kind of meta system. And the last thing I'll say on that is that I think that pretty clearly your system 5 would need to have a strong ethos. And he definitely recognizes that, because he says, here's the people you can let in the party. Have them as much debate as you want, but also here's the people you can't have in your party. You can't have the people who are going to be like, but what about if we just kept doing capitalism, dude, but nicer? Like, keep that out.
No Keir Starmers.
Yeah, exactly, literally. I mean, like, you need to have an ethos that is like, we are here to do no more capitalism, man, and here's what we're here to do. And you can't budge from that at all. Have as much dissension in the ranks after that as you want, but, like, you need that ethos, because if you don't, you're going to be an activist group, right? So I think that's mainly what I'm thinking.
Yeah, it's made me think of a lot of things. Initially, I was thinking about the Labour Party, right? Because you're talking about like an organisation's interaction with the environment, and a bourgeois political party seeks to capture voters. But the Labour Party is going after basically the same voters as the Conservative Party. They're not looking to expand the voter base in any way, nor are they trying to change the minds of those voters in any particular way. All they're trying to do is prove that they are analogous to the Conservatives, and therefore they're an organisation, and they're trying to match in some way the variety that's presented by the environment, and rather than trying to use either of those things that we were sort of alluding to earlier, efforts to amplify variety or attenuate variety, i.e. amplifying their own variety, or attenuating, i.e. lessening the variety incoming from the environment, kind of thing. They're not actually making any particular efforts to do either of those things.
Or it's just flipped. It's the wrong way around.
Yeah, perhaps. Yeah. And we've talked in the past about the law of requisite variety as it applies to organising a socialist economy, and some of the implications, or some of the ways in which that law vindicates or validates in some ways some socialist axioms. The idea of like the working class organising their own liberation, I suppose, and also the idea that the working class could collectively run society, kind of thing. And what's being demonstrated there is like, okay, you need all of the variety of... Basically, if you're going to have a political party, if you're going to have the ideal working class political party, you got to get as many people in as possible, so they can match the variety of the community as best they can. And that's the sort of mass party model, isn't it? That's the mass membership model. And that's how you then do things as you were describing before, is actually like reaching into other communities that you can't access in other ways, kind of thing. And then we were talking before in terms of like amplifying the variety of that political party, and then you bring up the instance of like soup kitchens, say, or like, so that therefore you're improving your the variety you can give to the community, i.e. you're improving your worth to that community. But then also you could actually like set up subsidiary institutions inside the community. Maybe it's those soup kitchens, but maybe it's like trade unions, right, which are not linked to your political party. But they're not directly part of that political party, but they are linked. And so you're therefore like, once again, amplifying your position in the environment, kind of thing. So it's all about building your capacity to match the wider variety of the environment, which you otherwise can't do without these efforts, I suppose.
Yeah, no, absolutely. You bring up, I think, a really, really great point there, in that, like, you are going to need a way. Say you're able to set up this perfect political party where you have operational representation in, like, everything. You have, like, you go after, say, like activist groups like Black Lives Matter, who are really trying to do something about like police brutality. You go after, you have like operational units that operate autonomously, that are like even things that are fun, like gun clubs, or things like fucking, I don't know, cooking or some bullshit like that. Teaching people how to like plant potatoes. That would be fun.
Kill team.
Play kill team. Oh God, yeah, I could not be the person to explain that. But you're also, as you say, you're really going to need something, and this winds up being System 4, that combats changes in the terrain. Because, like, okay, you set all of these things up, you have all of these connections, and they're able to communicate with each other. Okay, say, like, people talking about police brutality, and who do a lot of organizing work to get people to show up to protests or whatever. They need protection from, say, like, some sort of operational group that trains people on, like, protecting protesters. So there's some sort of, like, regulatory apparatus there where they're able to communicate and blah, 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 blah. But you also need something, and this is where, say, like, a kind of more anarchisty style of organizing things runs into a bit of trouble, which is funny because I feel like anarchists are like actually much better at like getting shit done when it comes to organizing. You need something that can kind of go, okay, here are the changes in the terrain. We've done this research into, say, like the political sphere. We know that, say, this law is going to be passed where they're no longer going to let people, like with who look a certain way, like protect people at protests. That's illegal now. You can't do that. That's what cops are here for. So you need something that can kind of go in and kind of like work around that. And that winds up being a System 4. And that, obviously, we can see how that works in partnership with System 5, which is the ethos. So it's interesting. Like, it isn't simply enough to get the connections between all of these different systems. And this is the kind of, like, communist organizing project, is that, like, you need something at the top. You need management. You just do. It sucks. Everybody hates it. Whatever. We're trying to do it in the best possible way. But you need people who can kind of go, you know what, we need to actually direct our attention here. We need to put our attention here. And this, I think, does a very good job of explaining how that could work without pissing off a lot of people, so, yeah. Also, what you said about kind of attenuating the wrong variety, I thought was really, really good. I mean, the main point of that whole first part of designing freedom is that so many capitalist firms attenuate and amplify variety in the wrong way. And the example he gives is computers. He's like, you should not be using computers to just like give management or operational people way more information than they can handle. They ran Chile for a little while on like 2 telex machines. You know what I mean? You don't need a lot of computing power, but you need to be using technology in a way, as he says, that like flips that circuit so that you're attenuating the things that need to be attenuating and you're amplifying the things that need to be amplifying. And it's all very clearly written out about like which way that needs to go. Always attenuate up, which is a great way to like maintain autonomy, and amplify down, which is a great way to like actually make things happen. You know what I mean? So it's all very good. It's all very, very good. I don't know what else we can say about like trying to organize in a left project. I suppose it's just like what this book is saying is just like take it seriously. I know we mentioned that at the beginning, but like it is like liberation is a very serious project, and we do need to actually start taking it seriously. And that involves seeing yourself in these recursions, and that you're not just a guy that goes and makes some phone calls for a politician to say that you did it on like Instagram and Twitter or whatever. Like, you're somebody who's taking this stuff seriously, and you're part of a broader organization that's going to make things happen. You need that, and you also need the organization. In a lot of like left sects, you get the first of those things, which is just the like, I take myself seriously, dude, but there's nowhere for that energy to go other than, as you say, like selling newspapers or whatever. So this is all very serious stuff. And I guess the only other thing I want to say is just that like it doesn't hurt to learn from what exists now. I remember when we interviewed June Reith, I asked her if she thought that if capitalism was a viable system. She was like, well, okay, that has a very technical definition. So no, you could not say that because they don't follow these organizational structures or dictums. But like at the same time, it is a system that is able to perpetuate itself extremely well. And you see all these anti-oscillatory devices, and we need to learn from those. Let's also learn from what doesn't work. I mean, Jesus Christ, so much doesn't work that like, once you start to model for yourself things that do work, you're going to start to see cracks in different organizational structures, I guess, because once you understand them, hey, you'll go, oh, there's a weak point. You know what I mean? I saw somebody talking about how useful it would be when we're actually doing like protests or whatever to not just throw your strength all at one place, because you realize that like, hey, police departments, that's literally what they're trained to do, is go in when there are a couple thousand people and just kick the shit out of them and get them to leave. But hey, if you actually like study their structures, what they're really not able to do is like go deal with like 100 protests all happening at the same time of like 100 people or 1,000 people or whatever like that. So,
and what that example would represent is both a strong, like what in this book might be like a management function, right? Some ability to coordinate that kind of action. But at the same time, it recognizes that all those micro protests couldn't possibly be coordinated from some central place.
Exactly. Yeah.
And they could all actually operate with the tactics. Supposing that a tactical repertoire was agreed upon as being broadly effective, you could choose whichever elements of that tactical repertoire you wanted to implement based on that situation, which sort of central management couldn't possibly have enough information, have enough variety to actually make decisions upon, kind of thing.
And they don't
so
get
it's a really
that
good
too.
example.
Like the establishment, whatever that may be, like they really don't understand that. It's whenever you see like, you know, they arrest one anarchist and they go, it's the ringleader, and he's like, you fool, I'm an anarchist. There is no leader. So yeah, that's another flaw.
Yeah, imagine if Scooby-Doo like pull the mask off and it's just like
someone else. It's like, I also don't know who you are.
Yeah, but also maybe the reverse of that example is also true. The reason why the police aren't very good at meeting all these micro protests, I've decided to call them, is because they are attempting to do top-down management, but they don't have the variety because it's impossible to have the variety to actually coordinate that kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
This stuff rocks.
Yeah, I think the thing I'm going to take away is like, I don't know whether it makes sense or not, but I'm going to think about this idea of like your systems and organizations need some kind of management function, but it doesn't have to be management in a sort of like bourgeois business sense. And what you said earlier was really interesting to me. I hadn't thought about it in this way, is that like there is a management aspect to basically all levels of recursion and almost all activity that's happening in the viable system model. And this is something we're probably going to leave out of this podcast, but like if you go and read these texts, if you go and read his other stuff, there's so much detail is given to the various relationships between all these levels, right? It's not like 5 dominates 4, 4 dominates 3, 3 dominates 1, and sort of 3 also says what 2 is, kind of thing. We have covered this. Like they have specific functions. It's drawn in a sort of vertical hierarchical way, but there's all these they perform their definite functions. Their relationships are sort of like coordinated or defined through almost democratic principles, in the sort of like there has to be some kind of agreement with like system 3 and system 4 to say this function is going to be this and your function is going to be this, or there has to be some kind of agreement between the management level of system 1 and the management level of system 3, which says, okay, we're going to say these things, but you're going to be left to do these jobs.
Yeah.
Everything is decided in some kind of quote unquote democratic way, and if we wanted to design like democratic worker managed corporations, you just make those relationships more democratic rather than be decided by 2 or 3 suits. You decide it by the entire company, kind of thing.
Yeah.
Those relationships have to be defined, and people have to know what they are and follow those rules, and up until the point when they have an opportunity to change them. But they do have an opportunity to change them, I suppose, is my point.
No, absolutely. One thing this is making me think is, remember when we read a group of international communists, the Fundamental Principles book, and we kind of dunked on them for being like, well, what's your political structure? And they're just like, a cascading system of councils. I don't know. There's a big council at the top. It's kind of like, is that recursion?
Yeah.
Like, it's not, but that it's very funny. Yeah, this stuff, it rocks. I'm always really interested, I think, whenever we read the history, but this is so fresh and so like, I don't know, different than typical Marxology that it's good. It's very good. And as June said, like, I think, you know, you always get that if Marx were alive today, but it's like, if Marx were alive today, he would love this shit, because it's kind of just like, I don't know, systems theory. You see a lot in what he writes. So all very good. Another beard, we got him, and we're back.
Yeah, we are back.
We're back.
Yeah, we probably should have said this at the start, but go and listen to our interview with June.
Yes.
Go and listen to our episode on designing freedom. Go and listen to our 2 episodes on Eden Medina's cybernetic revolutionaries. Go and watch our YouTube video on the viable system model. Then come back and listen to this.
Yeah.
Again.
And then actually what you should do is just go listen to General Intellect.
Yes. Yeah. Maybe forget all of
that.
those and go and listen to General Intellect instead.
Okay, well, we'll be back again with something cool and awesome and fun. But I would really suggest people, if you want to get into Stafford beer, either just read Cybernetic Revolutionaries, because Eden Medina does a really good job of touching on the things you need to know about, or just read this. Because I mean, like, if you are an organizer, this book would be perfect for you. You know, you have to kind of pick and choose with like what to take and what not to, because you're not some capitalist schmuck. But this is literally written for you to do exercises along with him. So I've never read Brain of the Firm because it's like $45,000 on like a used book site. But I don't know. This one's very useful.
I would like to imagine there was at least one sentence in this book that would blow everybody's mind, maybe.
Oh, yeah.
So
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Go and get it and find that sentence for yourself.
And it's also, having said all of this, like, he does have his central dictum, which is, if it works, it's out of date. And, like, at the very beginning of the book, he's like, if the way you draw your organization looks like the models in this book, that's insane. Nothing should ever look like the models in this book. And also, like, things are always changing. Things are always in flux. So he says something like, you know, a model for a system is never exact. It's more or less useful. So, you know, take everything that we've said with a grain of salt, I guess. Okay. Well, like Dan said, go do all of the things, and we'll be back again soon. And it's good to be back in the Imperial Operational Core number 2.
Yeah, welcome back. There's Mary Isle.
Yes.
Good to have you. Yeah, we are indeed back. We will be back again in less time than we were last time back, I suppose. Yeah, thanks everybody for listening.
All right, see ya. The music you heard this episode was Music to Kill Bad People To by King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard. If you like this song, you can check it out and much, much more on their Bandcamp at kinggizzard.bandcamp.com. Be sure and follow us up on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. And if you like what you heard, be sure and tune in next week for some more commie discussion. Till next time.